This lesson covers file systems usable on Windows Server. When you have a new volume available, the first action you're going to perform is actually format it with a file system. So I'm going to select a drive letter to use, and I can select which file system I wish to format the drive with. I have an option of NTFS, exFAT, or reFS. So NTFS is the traditional file system used on Windows servers. It offers us features such as security, auditing, compression, encryption, and really is the standard in which you're going to use for most scenarios. exFAT is built on the legacy file allocation table, which had a lot of limitations, for example 2 gigabit maximum volume sizes. That was improved with FAT32 taking up to 2 terabytes, however it lacks the security features, the auditing features, and really the robustness of the NTFS file system. reFS is a new file system introduced in Windows Server 2012. Currently you cannot boot a system from a reFS drive, and this resilient file system is really targeted at the highest levels of resiliency use cases in your environment. There are really two parts to a file system. There are the mechanics of how it writes data to disk, and then the APIs that are exposed to applications and the user. reFS shares the high-level APIs with NTFS, which means most utilities, security, auditing work the same for reFS as it does for NTFS. However, reFS features a brand new on-disk engine, which really gives you the highest levels of protection from corruption, from torn writes, for example in power down scenarios that were unplanned. A server just loses power, sometimes can cause corruption on an NTFS volume and require things like the check disk process to be used. reFS is something that is going to be expanded in future versions and is available now for when you do have those very high resiliency requirements. There are some differences in features supported. While NTFS has capabilities such as file system encryption, compression, quotering, you can't use those features on reFS today. And likewise, as I mentioned, you can't boot from reFS, you can't use reFS on removable media. But if you do have those requirements of the highest level of protection from any kind of corruption, you should look at leveraging reFS. I'm going to use NTFS. I'm going to select a quick format, and I'm not going to use file or folder compression. So I now very quickly have a new volume. So notice I've used the drive letter for this volume. However, I do have other options. I can actually add a mount point. So a mount point exposes this volume really as a folder of an existing file system. So this is a great option for if you have an existing disk and need to maybe add additional size to it using a second drive. Instead of giving this a drive letter, or in addition to, I can just mount it as a folder. So for example, if I look at my existing virtual SSD, I'm going to actually mount this new disk as a folder. So I can say browse to that drive, and I'll say create a new folder. It has to be an empty folder. And I can say test, click OK. And now this is available both as the E drive and by going into the test folder. If I create a test document, you'll notice that it's shown both in the folder and on the disk. They are the same thing. It's just giving it additional ways to access that drive. And I don't have to have drive letters at all. I could go into this and actually remove the drive letter and just use that folder path. So now you'll see the E has disappeared, but I can still access the content through that mount point. In addition to these mount points, we can create links. So a link just allows us to access a file or a folder from another location. So for example, this test document, I can say create shortcut, and notice there's a name there. And I could rename this. I could just say shortcut to test.txt. I can then place this anywhere I want. So I might go and place this on my C drive. When I double click on this, it's actually opening that original file. So this gives me ways to actually place content in other locations. I can do that for folders as well. So for example, my virtuals folder, I can say create a shortcut. And again, I can go and place this in another location. I could rename it. If I double click on this folder, it's taking me to that original location. So it's giving me flexibility in how I access these file systems, how I access files, and how I access folders. This concludes the lesson on file systems in Windows Server.